You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram.
Hello, this is Tim Cutler, CEO of the Vanuatu Cricket Association, and you're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly podcast.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly podcast. And on the podcast, we have started a new series on the podcast looking at associate nations within cricket and how they are developing the game in their country. Many of us cricket fans know so much about the established cricketing countries and not enough on the associate nations who play cricket. So it would be nice to learn more about those associate countries, and via the podcast, people can learn more as well. For today's Associate Cricket Series episode, we are discussing all things Vanuatu cricket. Joining me to discuss and talk all things Vanuatu cricket is the CEO of Vanuatu Cricket, Tim Cutler. Tim, welcome.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you here, Tim. And it's great to finally get this chat and interview sorted, because we've had months in the planning to do this chat. You've been busy with other things, of course, which we'll talk about in this chat today. But it's good to finally get it done today. So I'm very happy about that.
Yes, that is all my fault for everyone listening out there. There's nothing on Jack's back whatsoever, but it was me leaving you on red in Instagram for months at a time. But we've got here. It's almost Christmas, but we're here now.
Better late than never, as they say. Better late than never, Tim. But Tim, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I'd like to take them back to when they first got into cricket. It's been very fascinating listening to people's memories on how they started to get into cricket. So, Tim, let's go back to the very beginning, growing up. I know that's a long time, time flies.
Look, not all of us are born in 1998, but yes, well, 16 years earlier, 82, I was born. So I'm a kid of the late 80s and early 90s. My first memories of cricket, and part of this is augmented with my mother telling me stories, but I was about 7 years old, and it almost came from nowhere. But my mum was a sporty one and my dad not so much, but I'm guessing mum had always had the cricket on, whether on the radio or the TV, tennis, rugby league, etc. But I just took a real liking to cricket. And as someone who probably struggled with attention issues and maybe still does at 42 years old, I think a lot of that attention went to cricket. I was very well known for just sitting there and watching entire days of Test cricket and not moving. And I have flashbacks to when I was 7 or 8 and my uncle and auntie coming and walking past me and saying, hi, Tim, as they arrived and had lunch with my mum and dad and whatever. And then they said, bye, Tim, as they walked out, 6 hours later or whatever it was. And I hadn't moved. So was fairly obsessed with the game from then on. I've been known to go to bed with Australian cricket clothes on, with hats and shirts. So much so about the game that I even went and got my umpire's ticket when I was still playing junior tournaments, and would play boys cricket in the morning and then go and umpire men's cricket in the afternoon at the ages of 14 and 15. So I think when my dad came to pick me up at one stage, because I was still too young to drive, but I was umpiring. I think I was referred to as Doogie Howser a few times. But for me, they were the sort of golden years of late 80s, early 90s, watching World Series cricket when it was a tri-series and a 3-game final series, and really only getting to watch Australian Test series, because that was before we really had any rebroadcasts of any international series until the sort of early to mid 90s. And the memories for me of getting up early, we had Foxtel by then, and watching Australia beat the Windies over in the Caribbean in 1995 was a huge moment for Australian cricket, but also for me, that sort of seminal moments of watching the game. And I went from there. I grew up in the Sutherland Shire, in Sydney, but then funnily enough ended up playing all my grade cricket for Eastern Suburbs. But that also created a whole new group of people that I knew in a new area. And then 11 years ago, I moved to Hong Kong, and from a cricketing point of view, that was when everything changed. But yeah, I think I grew up sort of very much watching two formats of the game and obsessing over it. And that people say about not meeting your heroes, but there's a reason why there's a sort of Kookaburra bubble bat behind me, because Dean Jones was probably a huge reason why I love the game so much. And I might even be a natural left-hander, but I think I'm right-handed because Dean Jones was right-handed and he was an absolute hero of mine. And I got to know him later in life and working together. And unfortunately, he was taken from us too soon. But he was definitely a big reason why I love the game so much.
Yeah, definitely. Always a quick runner between the wickets, Dino, in one-day cricket. He revolutionised that, didn't he?
No, absolutely. And even though he had a bug knee and always turned on his right leg, you just see the pressure. Even now, I went back and watched, and unrelated to coming onto this podcast today, went back and watched the two finals that Australia won against Sri Lanka in the 93-94 World Series finals. And again, just watching him bat. And even though Mark Waugh scored at a faster rate, there's this more energy around Dino being at the crease and running that first one hard and really, I think, changed the game from that sort of impetus from opening batters and people going hard in the first 15, which was the power play bat, then to that pressure he put on fielders with his running.
Yeah, definitely. And he asked Curtly Ambrose to take his sweatbands off in that one day at the SCG.
Yeah, that was only a year earlier, and that's still funny. I think you hear the stories of everyone that had to be at the other end. He didn't get Dino out, but he got 4 or 5 others, and that was on a bit of a dodgy SCG wicket at the time as well, so it was hard enough. And then you got Big Curtly coming in and delivering it from about 8 feet at pace.
Yeah, it certainly fired up Curtly. That's one bowler you don't want to fire up. And Steve Waugh should know that. You mentioned 95 in the Caribbean, and he had that conversation with Cutler Ambrose, Steve Waugh, and he did what he did in that Test match, and Australia won the Sir Frank Worrell Trophy for the first time ever in ages in the Caribbean. You also mentioned, growing up, playing cricket. What was it like playing cricket with your siblings and your friends? What was it like playing cricket as a young guy? Or young kid, I should say.
Yeah, well, thankfully, we're just lucky to grow up. Again, Engadine in the Sutherland Shire, very leafy and quiet. And we were on the last street before a gully. So back then, many fewer cars on the road. We were able to dump our bags on an afternoon and run out there and play cricket until it was dark. Bikes, footballs, rugby league balls and soccer balls, and play cricket across the road. I was very lucky that 3 houses in a row, there were 3 of us boys all in the same age in the same year of school. So we basically all grew up together, doing kind of everything pre-mobile phones, really. We didn't get phones until our Christmas on our last year of school in 1999. So I sort of feel like we were very much the last of a generation that didn't have a mobile phone in their school bag. Going. So I had a very wholesome upbringing from that perspective, and many scars on my knees and beyond from falling over on some of that old scratchy bitumen road. So that was playing with neighbours. My brother is 3 years younger, and I don't think he had any choice about whether he was going to like cricket or not. He was dragged into it kicking and screaming by his older brother. And we used to have a sort of a long rumpus room that we're able to play. And it's really funny every time I'm back at my parents' house and see how low some of those ceilings and roofs are and realize how small it was. But I used to try and play wherever I could. My brother played as well. I got one of his bats in the background that he donated to the Vanuatu cause that I brought over with me, and it's gone on display rather than someone using it. It's probably too precious as a keepsake. But yeah, every family holiday, we would be taking our cricket gear, and I think we're more of a field sport family than a beach family. If we went for a picnic somewhere, it would be somewhere at a local area where we could then play cricket against a tree or somewhere, as opposed to going after the water. And then I was basically begging to play club cricket, club sport every year until I think my parents finally relented, and I sort of look back and see that my mum never drove, but it was our dad that was driving the 3 of us, my sister being another 3 years younger than my brother, to sport on a weekend, especially during the winter. That would have been terrible with us all going to 3 different soccer grounds, but then cricket as well all over the Sutherland Shire, which is not a small area. But yeah, I think I started playing soccer and playing cricket from when I was 9 years old, and I never looked back. That only really stopped when I went to play cricket in England when I was 21. So chasing sort of endless summers there for a few years. So yeah, I think very sport focused family, and I don't know, that was definitely something that brought us all together. And unfortunately, we lost Mum 6 years ago this this New Year's Eve, but it was always mum that the one that was texting me about cricket results or what was happening, or she was the one in the kitchen listening to the tennis, or running away from the room when the game was getting too tight, and she said, "No, I can't watch it," and would run away. But I think cricket has been central to the Cutler family, really. And I hope, my daughter's almost 18 now, living in the UK, but and it makes it hard for cricket to be the centre of anything. But I would say that if I have any more children or anything and get to spend a lot more time with them, that there would be probably exactly the same if they choose for it to be, where they like cricket as much as I did. But as we well know, kids these days have a lot more things to be interested and or distracted by than they did when I grew up.
Yeah, definitely. You're making me feel old. I mean, very old in terms of my sort of generation, even though we're different generations, but still, when you a 90s kid, and then you go through the years and you realize, geez, the world's changed, hasn't it? Makes you feel old about mobile phones and stuff like that. And now everyone's got one, and different devices and all that. But I suppose that's what cricket does, isn't it, Tim? And you touched on dealing through tragedy, and obviously sorry to hear about your mother and that. But I suppose that bonded you all together, and cricket has a way of wrapping its arms around everyone through tragedy, doesn't it? And it makes you even stronger and closer together. And that's the beauty of the sport, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it's because it's so inclusive to start with, that you feel a stronger bond to it, that when we're out there talking to kids and teachers and families about the game, and this isn't about being the tallest or the fastest or the strongest. It's such a cerebral game, and there's a job out there, a job within the sport. There's a role for someone to contribute anywhere, and that doesn't mean just on the field either. Talked about umpiring, but whether it's scoring and managing teams, looking after clubs, cricket doesn't work just with players on the field, but everybody's part of the family. I think it's one thing, recognizing that is probably a big step anyway, but also then the more you get involved, and I've been lucky to have almost every role that exists in cricket within the last 40 years. Geez, that sounds old. I'm 42. I didn't start, we'll say, within the last 35 years, okay, from fan to CEO. Yeah. But it doesn't work without all of its parts. And I know we'll talk about it a lot more, but when you're in a place like I am now, where sort of volunteerism doesn't exist, or at least in the same vein as we may see that I've seen in Australia, we might see in other places, that means those resources are come from somewhere else. And so you're robbing Peter to pay Paul to some degree, and the whole isn't benefiting from it. So, but that goes back to why cricket is so great. I know that there are so many other sports that don't run without all of those people, but I think at the core of it, when you're participating in the game, and you still see people aged over 50, over 60, over 70 playing. We just had a group of over 60s, normally most of them over 60s men and some women from Australia come and play, and a lot of them are playing cricket every week. And there aren't too many sports that at that kind of level that you're still playing with the same equipment and all day out in the sun and putting your body through what they're doing, and still having that still zest for the game and traveling the world playing it than groups like that do through cricket. So that's sort of humbling as well, to be part of something that is so important to so many people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think associate cricket, Tim, and a lot of people I've spoken to in this associate cricket series on the podcast for pretty much almost a year now, you have that theme of inclusion and diversity, and feeling that you belong and welcome into a team or any team in cricket. And many people play the game because they love it, but they also have come from very diverse backgrounds and have suffered personal tragedy in their lives, like refugees. Heard stories about refugees coming from other countries to play cricket and feel a sense of belonging and purpose, which is what the game of cricket can do. And it's fantastic. And I think associate cricket epitomized that the most. And because of the limited resources and everything that goes with associate cricket, it makes it all that worthwhile. But as you said, Tim, cricket is your life. And I wanted to touch on cricket administration, going into that field. Now, you were CEO of obviously Vanuatu Cricket at the moment, your current position, but you were at Hong Kong Cricket as CEO for a couple of years there. So just tell us about what made you interested to go into cricket administration, and why did you go to Hong Kong and then obviously now to Vanuatu?
It's a story that makes complete sense to me, but sounds strange to everyone when I explain it. My profession, I'd say the last, well, of the 25 years since I left school, 20 of those have been spent working in insurance. Fell into insurance, marine insurance, so cargo logistics, ports, terminals, straight after high school, and loved it. And I wouldn't be where I am without it. Took me around the world, worked for some great companies, and that was the reason why I actually moved to Hong Kong in 2013. Unfortunately, I'd never quite made it as a professional. Well, I'd never was good enough to be a professional cricketer. I was lucky to play as an overseas player in the UK for 2 years, and played a little bit of first grade in Sydney. Was lucky enough to make my debut playing against Mark Waugh, actually, when he's in his last grade game. It's always great to play against someone while there's still a poster on your wall. But moved to Hong Kong in 2013, and at that stage, I guess the story can go one of two ways. I knew almost nothing about associate cricket, and I'm like a lot of the people that have sort of asked you as well about these places or learning about it. It was really moving there, then seeing these people playing with limited resources, playing semi-professional, balancing life and playing for their country. And then at the time making World Cups and beating Bangladesh as they did in the 2014 Men's T20 World Cup. But moved there in an insurance role, but really immersed myself in the cricket community there, played for the Hong Kong Cricket Club, and just bear with me. Oh, sorry, I've just got something busting through my ears that we don't need to be hearing that, so you might have to small cut there. I just had a super coach Big Bash ad just come up. Anyway, yeah, played a lot of cricket there with the Hong Kong Cricket Club, and was really inspired with what I saw playing with and against these cricketers that were going off to represent Hong Kong and World Cups, and then sharing a dressing room with them or against them sort of weeks later. And I think when Hong Kong Cricket were then about to start looking for their first ever CEO, and I just think it's just one of those right time, right place situations that I already had a sort of vision of what the game was, because cricket in Hong Kong was sort of really represented modern Hong Kong, this mix of people originally from Europe, as in a lot of English people, but this new generation of people whose families had moved there from Pakistan and from India to make their life there in Hong Kong, and they were representing Hong Kong. And then on the women's side, half of the team were Hong Kong Chinese as well, an opportunity for girls and women to participate and show themselves and their skills through cricket there. And it was like, well, there's a real chance here for us to hold up cricket for what it is, sort of a shining light of where Hong Kong has come and where it is now. So yeah, I threw my hat in the ring there back in early 2015. It was quite a long, drawn out process. I remember having 3 very similar interviews because 3 directors were only available at certain times. So I got to really detail and get my answers down pat. But yeah, that was great. I was 33 years old and a CEO, let alone a CEO in cricket. A lot of the similar challenges, because I was working for a small sort of privately owned insurance broker at the time with sort of a global footprint. So a lot of the same issues about growth, small teams, leading within small teams, but having footprints sort of all over the world ran true in the cricket space at Hong Kong, and also building mutually beneficial relationships. In insurance, it's about insurance transaction, and in cricket, a lot of times you're talking to governments and sponsors and other partners to work together. So there wasn't as many differences as one might think. A little bit different reporting to a board as opposed to reporting to a manager or a CEO. Taking that step up, but I guess that's the same for any CEO. But it is by definition quite a lonely position, as generally you're the only person on the board representing the entire executive and greater staff, and then you're the only person in the staff who's part of the board. So you sort of that piggy in the middle to some degree, but you definitely learn a lot in a short time. So in those 2 years, I think we achieved a lot during what was a tough time with a lot of uncertainty from a funding point of view. But the crowning glory, I think, from a Hong Kong external point of view, was putting together the Hong Kong T20 Blitz, which I think at the time was ahead of its time. A T20 franchise tournament that ran over the course of a more or less a long weekend, allowing people and some of the greatest players to come in and play quickly, and have someone like Michael Clark wanting to be coming along to play in that first year to other stars, because you weren't asking for them to be there for weeks at a time, and to really engage a cricket loving public there. That was great. But again, there's a lot of learnings that came out of that as well. I think managing those board relationships and getting through that again as a young person in that sort of role. I think everything that I learnt from those 2 years in the role has really helped me as sort of Tim, the CEO version 2, being here in Vanuatu.
Yeah, definitely. My memories of Hong Kong cricket, Tim, are the Hong Kong Sixers, Super Sixers, which was a great tournament. I think it's coming back, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's already been back. They had it 2 months ago, and they moved it away from Kowloon and had it on turf at Ting Kwong Road or Mission Road.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting to watch. I think Australia won the tournament one year. I think David Warner and was it Glenn Maxwell that went over there for 1 year, played for Australia, the Australian team there. And as you would know, Tim, as we discussed before recording, I interviewed Marika Hill, who is a women's player from Hong Kong, and she's done very great things over there, as you would know in your time as CEO. And she was asking for the Sixers to return because it was such great fun. It gets people together in Hong Kong, and everyone has a great time. So it's great to see it's back and better than ever before. So long may that continue.
Yeah, and I think again, Hong Kong itself, like before my time, they've been ahead of the world with a lot of things. As the Hong Kong Sevens, was born out of there, or at least created something special that has spawned a global series and is now the crowning glory for rugby, in the sense that it's got into the Olympics in that format. And I think cricket as a whole probably missed the boat to some degree of doing something similar, where the Sevens is great. It's a weekend, it's a party, people come in, it drives great tourism, where cricket took too long to grasp what T20 cricket was, or to at least recognise the opportunity that Sixers had presented. So like you, I hope the Sixers does well, and I know that they are looking at international events as well, and you don't have to go too far to sort of look at some of the other teams they invited along to see potential partners that they may have that will see it played in other places. But I just fear that the cricket sphere is so clogged now with homogenized T20 franchise leagues, and I'm sure we'll get to this when we talk a little bit about the future later, that trying to find opportunities for events, and maybe if you're talking like a TV person, for cricket content that will actually capture the attention of enough people, the Sixers might struggle. But I hope for their sakes that it does, and as long as it gives as many people an opportunity as possible. Because what we're seeing too often, I think, in the world, is the same players going around playing in teams with very similar colours and very similar names. And I don't know how that is actually taking the game forward.
Yeah, that's spot on, and we'll discuss that a bit later on when we talk about the global game as a whole. But Hong Kong Sixers reminded me of that competition in Australia, Tim, and I think our Australian viewers and listeners of the podcast would remember those Super 8s tournaments that the States used to play in Australia. They used to play an 8 tournament or something back in the day, I think it was. So Cricket Australia experimented with something like that, but it didn't go on for a lot of years, I don't think. And then you had other formats as well. Cricket Max by Martin Crowe in New Zealand. That was a weird, wacky format.
It was, and then again, something that probably was ahead of its time with scoring zones and whatnot. You can see little elements of that getting picked up with what we saw in the 100. And yeah, there's definitely been some innovators out there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 100, of course, and then there's a tournament in the West Indies that's called the 60, which is 60 balls. Just so much cricket on, as you mentioned. It's just too much. And then you have T10 cricket as well, which is another thing that people don't really like within the game at the moment and all that stuff. But I suppose it ain't bad experimenting and trying different things, I suppose, in the game. But we've sort of stuck with T20 cricket from the early 2000s until now. So anyway, as I said, we'll get to that a bit later on. I'm sure you have some passionate views about that, Tim, no doubt. But then you went to Vanuatu, where you're based now. You've been the CEO for the last 3 years, if I'm correct.
Almost, 4 years in April. Yeah. So I've ticked over from saying 3.5 years to almost 4. So yeah, time's flown.
Yeah, it has. So what made you want to go to Vanuatu and be the CEO of this great country in the cricket world?
Yeah, well, the name that's on my microphone was the reason for that. You know, post Hong Kong, the job in Hong Kong, and it was something that frustrated me during my time there, was how poorly, from my perspective, working for a leading associate, was how poorly that the game was covered in the mainstream cricket media. You know, it was generally a novelty item, whether it's a great catch by a Bermudan in a World Cup or little stories here and there. I don't think that the game was given the credence, the skill level that was being played at, but also the stories behind the games played beyond the 10-4 members at the time. And really, there was a lot more on the line in the cricket being played between, let's say, a Hong Kong and a Papua New Guinea in a World Cricket League match in 2011 than there was between Australia and England in any test match ever played, because as we've seen with PNG recently dropping out of the Cricket World Cup League 2, a couple of results, or one particular result, can cost your cricketing nation $750,000 a year and more, depending on one result. And one particular game that I'm sure you're going to ask me about, you know, Vanuatu against Italy in February in Malaysia, was literally the $1 million game, because whoever won that got $265,000 funding over the next 4 years, guaranteed, on top of the tournaments they'd be competing in being subsidized. So I was really passionate about that, and had started talking to lots of people around the internet on various things about associate cricket, but had met Daniel Beswick when he was working for Fox doing stats back during the Hong Kong Blitz, and had started talking to him, and met another guy who's on Twitter as Copernicus Cricket, about talking about various things. And I didn't know at the time, and they didn't know at the time, that they actually knew each other. And Copernicus Cricket is Nick Skinner, and both Nick and Daniel grew up on the central coast of New South Wales and knew of each other. And when I eventually pulled them all into a chat room and said, right, I've had these very similar conversations with both of you. Here's our chance to change the way that the world sees and hears about associate cricket. Let's do this. And that was back in 2019, and started with podcasts. Oh, sorry, it was the end of 2018. Started with podcasts, and we got the website up and running for when all three of us went to Namibia to cover World Cricket League Division 2, and went from there. You know, we had the COVID stoppage with cricket around the world, which became a bit of the golden age of emerging cricket, because we got to tell and talk about all these amazing stories of the people behind the game around the world. But when cricket started going again, it was in Vanuatu. First place in the world was playing cricket once COVID had hit, because people were in various stages of lockdown in those early days of COVID in 2020, except Vanuatu. So we had made contact, and Emerging Cricket offered to do match reports and previews gratis, as you know, everything that we do there is all volunteer based, and to try to help out an emerging associate there. And I got to know the CEO at the time, Shane Dietz, who was a player as well, a former first class cricketer from Australia, who'd been in Vanuatu originally as high performance manager and then CEO. And so we done all that at the T10 Blast. You know, it was the T10 competition that got hundreds of millions of views around the world. But then Shane took the opportunity to move to the Netherlands, which is where his wife is from, to coach the women's team there. And since then, he's now taken West Indies to a semi-final in a women's T20 World Cup, which is amazing, as the head coach for the Windies women. And he was leaving. I said, "Oh, what's going on?" He told me the story. I said, "Oh, what are they doing with your role?" Sort of thinking that, you know, smaller countries sometimes will see the departure of the highest paid executives as a chance to sort of break up the role or save money or whatever. And he said, no, they're replacing me, and you should apply. You should apply. And at the time, I was living in Brisbane. I'd moved from Hong Kong to Brisbane for love, and had got a job back in insurance. But unfortunately, the love part of being in Brisbane hadn't worked out, and I was there in the middle of COVID. And as much as I love Brisbane, it's a great city, it was sort of lost its purpose for when I was there. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I think I had my full interview on the Friday and got a phone call on the Monday offering me the job, and moved there in April 21 in the midst of COVID lockdown. So the only people moving backwards and forwards between anywhere in Vanuatu were either passport holders or people like me with a visa. Landed under the cover of darkness, 2 weeks in quarantine, and then released into a place that felt like I was on a different planet, really, where COVID had almost never existed. And the only memories I had when I'd spent half a day in Port Vila off a schoolies cruise back in 1999. So, yeah, so come April, that'll be 4 years here.
Yeah, it's crazy to think when you put in that sort of context, really. And Vanuatu is such a beautiful country, as all those Pacific islands are, and nations, and not too far away from Australia. So it's easy for you to travel back and forth in close proximity, given that we are Pacific neighbours. And that's pretty good in terms of cricket as well, because there's a lot of back and forth there with Cricket Australia and the Pacific nations, which we'll talk about a bit later, I suppose.
Yeah, New Zealand cricket as well. And literally as we speak today is the first Jetstar direct flight from Sydney landed here. So, yeah, direct flights out of Queensland from Virgin and Qantas, and now Jetstar out of Sydney. Makes that a lot easier. Unfortunately, our national airline went under earlier in the year, which meant that the links out of Melbourne that were direct and more regular ones from Auckland ended, but other airlines have stepped in. So it's pretty easy to get here. And as you said, it's 3.5 hours from Sydney, and I think a lot closer than anybody really knows until you tell them. Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's not that far when you think about it, which makes it quite easy for travel, certainly for people who want to go on holidays or for business like yourself. So then early this year, you decided to play for the national team and made your debut in both T20 and List A cricket. And for those who don't know what List A is, it's basically one-day cricket, really. So you played for the national teams there in those tournaments and series that they were partaking in. Talk us through that, playing cricket at age 42 and the CEO taking the park with the team and strapping the spikes on again. How was that moment like? What was that feeling like when you walked out there?
No, pretty exciting. I'd never really stopped playing, although I have to say I'd let myself go to some extent during those COVID years and moving here. But lost a lot of weight as soon as, from more or less when I moved here, and started playing for North of Fate, my club team here, and have been playing ever since. And the ICC eligibility criteria is pretty clear. Either need to be a citizen of the country, i.e. hold a passport, be born in that country, or have 3 years of residency. So I ticked over the appropriate length of time to be available, and had been playing as much cricket as anybody here at the time. So as we know all too often these days in modern, especially T20 cricket, but a lot of formats, left arm spinners can be a bit of a cheat code to the game. But no, I was still loving it and taking wickets and scoring runs. It was just really good to be picked, because I'd recused myself from any of those conversations. And I went from, I'd been on a lot of tours already as manager. I think every men's tour we've had since I've been here, and that's been Canada, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, to name a few, including Fiji. I made my unofficial debut in Fiji the year before in some unofficial matches, but it was interesting to be part of that sort of situation. I probably trained more than I'd ever had. I'd never trained sort of 4 or 5 or 5 or 6 times a week at any level that I'd ever played. So it really was a change for me, and it was really good to, as I said, contribute. Probably hoped wanted to contribute more with the bat in Malaysia than I did, and that's probably one small regret. But no, to be bowling in those conditions, those were playing in sort of over 30 degree heat and very high humidity, and to bowl my full complement of 10 overs in all but one game, and that was only through miscommunication with the captain when I said in my sixth over that, well, I think I'd probably need to come off and have a rest. He thought I was saying him that I didn't want to bowl again, and then I don't know, for those watch those games, that Josh Razu was taken down with sort of heat stroke and various other things. So that was the least of his worries, whether I was going to bowl again. But to bowl in those conditions and to be the best economy rate, and to be, I think it was our second highest wicket taker, and some really cool moments that I think I'll remember as some of my best in cricket, especially the game against Bermuda that was a do or die for us, and to take a few wickets. But then then I've gone on and played in the qualifier in Samoa as well. So the juices are always there, the competitive juices, and it was great to get out there and maybe made the transition easier than people think, that I go from being the boss to still trying to be a boss, but very much not. We've got a great head coach here in Chris Laffin, and he's been back in Melbourne after his partner had their second baby recently, and he was replaced by a good friend of mine, Jeff Cook, who played first-class cricket for Northamptonshire, but I played with at Eastern Suburbs, and actually came over here coaching the Australian men's Indigenous team when they came over on a tour in May last year, and he took over while Chris was on paternity leave. But I don't try and be a coach at any stage. I think it's a very specialised skill and role. So I very easily went from CEO to just player to be learning again and being part of that. Yes, as a senior player and as a sort of an older sort of leader in the team, but no, really enjoyed that. And then I hope, even though men don't have any ICC cricket till 2026 down, that we've dropped out of the Challenge League, but also didn't progress any further in T20. It gives us a bit of time to rebuild. But look, as long as I can still contribute and be fit enough to be taking catches and running between the wickets and whatnot. I'm quite lucky being a spin bowler. That's your ticket to longevity, I think. And yes, I've seen 70-year-olds bowling off more than a few paces, but I'd like to think that I'll still have a lot to offer for the next few years.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And I suppose it just makes you realise that if you're in cricket administration, you can join in and be one of the players, which you've done, and just get stuck in and be a part of the team environment, and especially that game against Italy. Sorry to bring it up, but it was a very close game. Low scoring game. I think looking at the scorecards in readiness for this interview, 100 odd on both sides, low 100s. And I think you were not out in the first innings there, batting down the order.
Yeah, it wasn't the great not out. I managed to run out Patrick Matartava, who was batting at the time when I came in, we were bowled out for 102, and this is an absolute do or die match. Whoever won this went through. On saying that, the tie still got Italy through, so we had to win no matter what. And after the first 2 overs, the 2 quicks, Josh and I could see that there wasn't much happening there, and so Josh bowled from one end. Josh Razu, the captain, he bowls right arm off spin, and me from the other end, and he bowled magnificently. He took 5 for 30 from his 10. I took 2 for 30 from mine and got 2 early ones as well, which helped. Two guys tried to sweep. 2 guys got LBW, so that was great, and went down to the wire. We were ahead on DLS, and when it started raining at about the 20 over mark, and it just ticked over to me in game, and we had got them to 7 for 79. When they were on 90, there was a catch put down at cover from someone who doesn't drop catches. So yeah, they ended up limping across the line at 8 down, and look, it was a tough one as well. I know a lot of the Italian players, but I know the president really, really well, and it was a tough one to be playing against people that you like so much, and it was the same way for them. They didn't over celebrate. They're obviously happy because it's huge, and you wouldn't begrudge someone celebrating, but it wasn't celebrating in our faces or anything like that. And Fabio Marabini, the president, afterwards said, I'm just so sorry it had to be against you guys. And he thought we had it in the bag at one stage. He said that while we were taking wickets, and they were panicking, really. Some of their really experienced first-class cricketers were not playing up to their potential because of the situation that we had them under with our bowling and fielding. He thought, well, they were going for all money. So as a neutral, it would have been an amazing game of cricket to watch. I'm sure. And every now and then I do watch the highlights, or I'll show someone the highlights, and I just sort of have all those feelings come back again of what could have been. But yeah, the $1 million game, and that's really what gets in your blood when it comes to associate cricket. And the more that people know about stories like this, and I think still the ICC could do so much more in help sharing these stories. I think a lot more people would be interested in the game at this level, and more interested about expanding the World Cup, and more interested in wanting to know how the ICC is helping grow the game across the world, rather than pay more money to countries that don't necessarily need it, which is one of the ongoing bugbears for all of us trying to grow the game at this level.
Yes, definitely. No doubt we'll talk about that a bit later on, because you covered some good points there, Tim, which a lot of people are thinking about. But we interviewed Fabio on the podcast a few months ago, and he mentioned that. He said it was a great win for us because it meant so much in terms of funding and money and what we can do. But he also felt a bit for Vanuatu. And I suppose cricket's a cruel game, isn't it? There's got to be a winner and a loser. And, if you lose like that by not many, it's very, very hard pill to swallow. But you go again, and, there's always another opportunity, I suppose. But I suppose a story to tell the grandkids in the years to come, Tim, that I was there in that game and went down to the wire and, just didn't quite do it. But, to be a part of it was great. So fantastic to hear that. And also fantastic to hear about your journey as well in cricket, Tim, as well. Cricket is a big part of your life, and thank you for sharing that with us. Always find it fascinating listening to people's memories and how they got into the game and where you are now in terms of your various positions. And we wish you all the success in the years to come, especially being CEO of Vanuatu and seeing where you can take this team going forward. So thank you for sharing that with us, Tim. Tim, I thought to start this interview on Vanuatu cricket, let's talk about the history of cricket in Vanuatu, because you can learn a lot about cricket from its history, and the history of cricket in Vanuatu is quite interesting. So, Tim, give us a brief overview on the history of cricket in Vanuatu and how it all started, how it became to be what it is today. I think we've lost you, Tim, in terms of the audio. Bear with us, everyone listening.
Yeah. Just bear with us as well. I think I've knocked my... Here we go. It should be okay now. Have you got me?
Yeah, we got you now, Tim. So
yeah. Sorry. Beginners. Well, Vanuatu's cricket story is so similar to a lot of countries around the world that where the British went, cricket followed it. And I don't know how much you've talked about sort of history of cricket previously, but it was in the 1840s that the British Army sent an edict out to all of the barracks and all the armies around the world saying that there will be a cricket ground built next to British Army barracks all over the world. So that's when cricket really became a going concern as for recreation and development of their army personnel. So that's why it's so synonymous really with Hong Kong to me, because Hong Kong was colonized by the British from 1842 after the Second Opium War, and that meant that sort of when cricket started, that was when Hong Kong really was beginning in the modern world anyway. So cricket came here with the British, and we have quite an interesting history in that we were a joint French-British condominium until 1980 when we became an independent republic. But cricket was played on the ground which is was known as British Paddock, but is now Independence Park, and it was generally only played by English expats, but there was a smattering of locals that played from various areas here. But it was in the late 80s when Mark Stafford, who remains the president of the VCA, came here and whilst loved cricket, said, well, no, we've got to do more about growing the game and getting it into schools, and started talking to the Australian government and started talking to the ICC and found the first pot of money to pay for the development program, which started after a lot of work done by volunteers through the 90s, and when the VCA became a member of the ICC as an affiliate in 95, but it was 2001 that the first employee was brought on, and that was Pierre Chillier, and Pierre's still here as development manager, but it's grown from strength to strength. The men's team has competed in Pacific Games even before as an ICC member, but has gone on to, as some netizens have rightly pointed out, Vanuatu sort of rode the bottom rungs of the World Cricket League ladder, always sort of keeping one step ahead of the guillotine until February this year. But and then the women's team started playing in the early 2010s as well. Although we've had females playing for Vanuatu before that, we had Alvina Chilia, Pierre's daughter, play in 2005 in on an ICC boys under 15 tournament, but you were allowed to pick girls up to under 17. So we've had women playing for the country for almost 20 years. So the men have sort of ridden that sort of 50 over wave, but also been part of the regional qualification for the T20 World Cups, getting as far as the regional final last year against Papua New Guinea, Japan, and the Philippines for direct qualification to the World Cup. That's how Papua New Guinea got to the Men's World Cup in the US. And our women are the country's highest ranked sporting team now at 32 in T20 cricket. And within the last 15 months have defeated world ranked number 11, which would be Papua New Guinea, which was in the qualifier we hosted here. And then in game one of the Women's T20 World Cup qualifier in Abu Dhabi, played in May and June this year. Game one came up against Zimbabwe, the first time that any Vanuatu team had come up against a full member team in official cricket in any format. And we defeated Zimbabwe, which was amazing. Unfortunately, didn't win another game in the tournament. Came up against the strong associates in the Netherlands and the UAE, and also played against the full member Ireland. And it's been an interesting journey on the senior cricket side. One thing that a lot of Pacific nations grapple with are job opportunities within nations, and something that's out there for men and women of a few countries of the Pacific is the opportunity to go and pick fruit or work in other similar industries in Australia and New Zealand, and they're able to do it at reduced tax rates, because a lot of the time these are jobs that Australians don't want to be doing. So farmers are able to bring in labour from the Pacific, and it's no different for Vanuatu. We have tens of thousands of people at any one time in Australia and New Zealand in similar jobs, and you can imagine in a country with a population of 300,000 the effect that has on society as a whole, let alone cricket. And cricket is definitely not immune to it, and within the last year we've had up to half of our squads in Australia, and we have a great partnership with a company called iComply, who is the labour hire company that employs most of those cricketers to allow them to play and train at the same time, when normally they'd be working 6 days a week, all hours through the day. So the women's team saw 7-8 of our best 11 coming from picking fruit. So there's a great documentary called The Season that was just put out in Australia, that was shown on ABC, and it's going to be all around the world, but can be watched on the VCA Facebook page, about the story of the girls behind the scenes working and training and trying to get there. So I think Vanuatu cricket, like so much of Vanuatu culture, and it's a word that gets thrown around a lot about resilience. We live in the country most susceptible to natural disasters than anyone in the world. We have so many of the world's cyclones start close to us. So every cyclone season, we're always watching the skies nervously. We've got active volcanoes, that are tourist spots, but are also risky. We have earthquakes every couple of days. We're right on the ring of fire, and that's something you just get used to. A shake, you might have 5 in a week, or you might have 2 or 3 in a month. It's just something that you get used to. And then the other effects of climate change that comes in extreme storms, etc. Is we had 2 Cat 4 cyclones in a day and a half hit us in March last year. So trying to come back from that, had to show that resilience. And then we see it from an operational point of view, the way that we're able to manage having so many cricketers living and working overseas, and a country that's still young. Like I said, has only been independent since 1980, and any Pacific or young nation going through that as a small island state grappling with the geopolitical struggles which we see is happening in the Pacific, with if people are talking about China's influence in the region, or Australia, New Zealand, America, France, etc. We've got New Caledonia only 300 kilometres to the southeast. We're hoping that they're going to be able to host some cricket in a few months, which will actually see the French national women's team play there at the same time as they come under the auspices of France cricket. But from a cricket point of view as well, it's not just about those pointy results in international cricket. I think the more satisfying thing, the more valuable thing that we do is the community programs that we run. We run anti-gender-based violence messages alongside of our school programs, and we've also got something called Women's Island Cricket, which is empowering 500 women to be getting out of the villages and competing together. Lessons about food choices. We do blood tests before they compete, and blood tests later in the year to show how their health has improved. Diabetes is at epidemic levels here, just through a lack of education about food. So there's the basics that we can go in and help with, and take nothing for granted about what people know, and also to create a safe space, especially for the girls and women, because it's eye-watering high rates of assault within family groups and within villages here that show that we can really try and make a difference by getting in there and making and teaching some important lessons, especially to young men as they're growing up, about the right way of cultivating healthy relationships. But and it's through cricket that we're able to do that. And a lot of my conversations with potential partners, both corporate sponsors but also NGO entities, it's really about the community impact of what we're doing. And really the international exposure is generally second, easily second and behind our community impact in what we do, which is, I think, maybe, I wouldn't say that it's different to other places, because you can see how that's changing from the community impact of sport versus just being a brand on a shirt. But I think in places like this, it's all the more important, and the type of partners that you look for. It's about sharing the same values and what we're trying to do for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I suppose, in a way, cricket teaches you great life skills and lessons, and what you're doing there, trying to implement that into the community, is fantastic, Tim. And it's a great program that you have there. So you should be proud of that. And also, thank you for sharing that brief history lesson on the history of cricket in Vanuatu. It was very interesting. I certainly learned something new by listening you speak about those various things about cricket in Vanuatu and how it all started. So I'm sure our viewers and listeners of the podcast will do the same, and probably go on Google or whatever and read up about Vanuatu and cricket there, and see how the game got developed and started there. And I think that's the beauty of associate nations and their startup in the game, and how they became to be. It's probably someone that came from another country like England or Australia that organized cricket, and then it grows from that sort of moment on. So yeah, very similar in terms of how the game is, how it became a thing in those countries, with the British, of course, but also expats and other people, organizing cricket because they miss cricket from their homeland. So they might as well just start up a local comp in their country. So thank you for that, Tim, sharing that about the history of Vanuatu cricket. Certainly learned a lot by listening to you there. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed part 1 of our Associate Cricket Series episode with Tim Cutler. I hope you enjoyed hearing Tim and I discuss his cricketing journey and the history of cricket in Vanuatu. Stay tuned for part 2 of our Associate Cricket Series episode with Tim Cutler.